Hi, teachers. Dr. Donovan here to talk a little bit about baseline data for task 2. So wanted to refresh your memory on some of the information that I was working with. So here's my baseline data from a previous lesson. Narrative writing, previous lesson, not pre-test, post-test, but a previous lesson that students did about narrative writing. They wrote a story. And I broke it down. These, of course, would be pseudonyms and into skills, 4 skills. This right here is a graphic. It's a chart representation of the previous assessment information. This is the whole class graphic. So we see a bar graph here. Very easy to make these, so I'm going to show you how. Here's a new slide that's blank. If you do insert, chart, columns, the Google slide will create this chart for you. If you double click on it, open source, it will create this template for you. So here's the chart. Now this is just the automatic information that comes with it, but you can go ahead and click on them and change it to skill 1 or skill 1, which of course I would put dialogue. Then maybe figurative language. Maybe sensory language. And maybe compelling ending. So you decide, but they would be things that you're actually going to teach during the lesson or that you taught during the lesson. And you can see how you can easily change those around. So for mine, for narrative writing, if I open the source, you can see where I put the baseline information for my entire class. So this is a chart for the entire class, which is the representative data of the baseline. So that would be the information that you put in the earlier part of your task 2. This is the baseline data or the pre-assessment or the previous assessment that upon which you are going to inform your lesson for task 2. Now, I decided that I used 15 students. So the numbers here mean 12 out of 15 students were successful, 15 out of students were successful, 7 out of 15 students, 12 out of 15 students. So that's just kind of the baseline of that. On this slide, you can see where you can put focus student 1 alongside. You can make a chart just for focus student 1. You can make a chart just for focus student 2. You can see how you have a sample student. So you could make one of these and then you could actually crop them because you don't need to see everybody's. Or just make 3 charts because it's really not that difficult. So if you open the source, you can see here. I could just remove all of this. And then I just have focus student 1. Would do the same. And then you just have focus student 2. Okay. If you want to include when you get to the point where you include the previous assessment and the post assessment, you can copy these. Focus student to pre-assessment, focus student to post-assessment. Well, hopefully that will be stronger. Right, because you're such a good teacher and you made such great differentiation accommodations. And you can see the pre-assessment and post-assessment side by side just for focus student 2. So I'm just going to undo those because I like how I had it before. I just wanted to show you that you could do these side by side. Okay. Okay, here's a little bit more from the slides that we had in class last night. So if you see here, focus student 1 baseline data, focus student 2 baseline data. Again, you just only want the data from that student. So when it says representative chart or data, baseline data from the student, they need their own graphics separate. And then Dr. Nell talked about the vocabulary that needs attention. So when it says graphic representation of data collected, it's a visual way that data have been gathered. So here we see the pre and post assessment. So the before and after, before you taught them explicitly, after you taught them explicitly. So this looks like it is whole class. And probably somewhere you'd want to explain what these numbers mean. Okay. And then post-assessment scores. This looks like another example. And you'd have to explain the chart in some way. And the last part is the rubric. So you want to make sure that you have a rubric or scoring guide. And as we talked about in class, making sure that you give that to the students before they do the assignment, invite them to use it for self-assessment so they can see how they did before they turn it in. If you give your students an opportunity to self-assess or do a peer assessment before they submit, the chances are they're going to learn it better, and you're also going to have an easier time grading or assessing how they're doing it. So when we think about the rubric, you have to think about the criteria as clearly as you can make it. And I think analytic rubrics are really good, or some sort of checklist or single point rubric. So just real quickly, just go to insert, and you want to have a table for the number of criteria and then the categories you're going to use for assessment, which don't necessarily have to align with the grade, but you might want to try like a 4-point or something like that. So let's see. Insert table. So I'll do maybe 4 different criteria, 4 different categories for scoring or for the rubric. And then if I'm teaching 4 goals or 3 goals or whatever kind of skills you're teaching that you're looking for, it might even just be 1 in 1 class period. You want to make sure that you have that clearly marked on the rubric. Okay, so if I'm going to make 3 is meets, 2 is not yet, 1 is attempted, and 0 is not attempted. Or something along those lines. So progressing, you can, decide what you want them to be. So if I have my criteria here, so if I'm teaching the dialogue, I want there to be identify the purpose of the dialogue from 4 options. I want them to have paragraphing for new speakers. I want them to use punctuation. Quotation marks, period, comma, and like that's pretty good. Probably I can teach in that 1 class period. And so I have to decide what meets is, oh, I like to have a little reflection piece too, but okay, just leave it at that. So let me think about this for a minute. Okay, so meets means that. Actually, I decided I'm gonna have to have two. Okay, so the first is that the dialogue that they use must be purposeful and not a filler. Maybe attempted would be a filler, maybe unclear the purpose. I'd like them to label what their purpose is, so accurately describes the purpose. And maybe their reasoning and evidence conflict. So attempted, unclear, something along those lines. So paragraph, so accurately, paragraph, each new speaker. This might be inconsistent. Paragraphing, attempted would be maybe partially. And punctuation, so consistent use of accurate punctuation. This would be inconsistent. And that might be meaning sometimes it's quoted, sometimes the periods where it needs to be, sometimes it's not. Partially would be, well, this is, see how it's difficult to think about when, you know, how are you gonna measure what's the difference between a 2 and a 1 and 3 and a 2. And I think that's part of this task, is to see if you have a sense of what it is. It's really helpful if you do your own assignment, so, and then score yourself, score yourself, so how you would score it when students submit it to you, but you have to have this sort of worked out before you start teaching it. So inconsistent. Well, maybe this one would be some punctuation marks are, some are accurate. Some are not, and this would be inconsistent, no clear pattern. And I would add a little bit more to this because, like, I'm the content expert, so I'd be able to explain this, and also I would talk about this in my task, right? You would do that in your task. So thinking about the rubric is really important to have ahead of time, so you know how you're going to assess them, how you're going to explain it to the students. And it might even be great to say, here's one example, how would you score it? Here's another example, how would you score it? So that the students have a sense of what's strong, what's a strong representation and what is not. Okay. All right, so in this video, we talked a little bit about baseline data, graphic representation, and rubric. And I hope this was helpful. Reach out if you have any questions.